tell me about the moment one of you who went, what if we put makeup on? Tell me about that moment.
There's that great scene in Close Encounters where Richard Dreyfuss is making Devil's Peak or whatever it is. He seems kind of possessed, and he's putting these mashed potatoes into this shape. We wound up going downstairs from this loft that we had, buying a mirror, picking up makeup. God knows what the makeup was we were using. And we went upstairs and just started playing with makeup.
Been waiting a while to say these words. Welcome to Stories to Tell. Thanks for joining me and my future guests. Been filming episodes with an array of talented, interesting, funny, thoughtful, cool people. And any of you who've seen the promo reel, you know that the idea for this really came from almost the last 40 years of my life and career. Having met some really interesting people, and not just celebrities or superstars in some cases, but just people who've had interesting lives and are good at telling stories. That's really what this show is about. It's not so much of an interview. I'm not really an interviewer. I have collected some pretty fun stories. Like if you ever have me over to your house or we're just having a drink somewhere, I'm going to have a couple of good stories to tell you, to lay on you. And so I'm always looking for that in other people. Some of my guests, a lot of my guests, oh, there's a bird that's already a fan. Oh, seriously? Motherfucker. Some of my guests are dear friends of mine for decades. Some of my guests are newer friends. Almost everyone is someone so far who I know socially in some way. I thought it was a good jumping off point. And actually, it's just a great excuse to hang with these people because we all have busy lives. And, you know, the truth is that a lot of the people I've had on the show, it's been really for selfish reasons in that it's the perfect way to get to hang with them. We all have really busy lives. A lot of us are traveling and touring, and not that everybody's a traveling musician or performer, but you know, everybody's lives are busy. And sometimes it takes something like a show like this to be the perfect excuse to get together. And in many of the cases of the episodes you'll see, what you don't see is that we hug it out and I say thank you and then we go to dinner. It's been so fun to do these shows and hang with these people. And I'm looking forward to a lot more of my acquaintances and friends being guests, but I'm even more so looking forward to sitting down with people who I don't really know and hearing their lives and their stories. And we kind of cover, these episodes so far have covered everything from gut laughing to tears. Very grateful to everybody who's been my guest so far. We've banked some really, really great episodes I can't wait for you to see. So whether you're joining us with a tonic water or a club soda or a martini or a cup of coffee, just sit back, relax, and hang with us. And I'm so excited to introduce this episode. My first guest is Paul Stanley. If you ask me, the word icon and legend, those words are kind of overused and too freely used these days. When it comes to the band Kiss, they really, really do apply. And there are very few artists in the history of music who are as iconic to this day as the band Kiss. And as their lead singer, guitar player, and primary songwriter, Paul Stanley is synonymous with that band. What you'll find out in this episode is what he's like as a person and some other things that he does that you might not know about that are very individually him. Paul and I became friendly just a few years ago, actually during the pandemic. And it's been so fun to make a new friend at this stage of my life. And we have a lot in common. We have some people in common, but mostly we just have a lot of shared experiences, love for family, love for our fans, love for what we do. He's a really thoughtful, intelligent, funny guy with a heart of gold. And I loved my time with him, and I hope you enjoy this episode, the debut episode of Stories to Tell. All right. Cheers, my friend.
Fancy seeing you here.
So good to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. You know that.
How did I do?
Oh, that's good.
That's good, right?
Oh, yeah.
All right. We both still have things to do today, so.
Yes, I'm a lightweight. I usually save this for the evening.
Yeah, so do I. But it's
Any excuse.
It's nearing the evening. Nobody knows what time it is.
Well, somewhere in the world.
Yeah, it's time for this.
That's right.
Cheers. I'm so good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
And
always.
My first question is, let's talk about the fact that usually when in our friendship the last few years, we're calling each other or texting each other from God knows where in the world on tour.
Mm-hmm.
With the band retiring, and we've talked about this personally, but how do you think you're going to do with the lack of dopamine? Because when I was thinking about, that's one thing that we have in common, although on a very different level.
No, it's all relative.
It's all relative, but that feeling of not just your job, but your life revolves around walking out in front of a bunch of people who scream that they love you. And the sound and the smell and the experience of that, I think really creates a very warped sense of dopamine in our body. So what do you think is going to happen to replace that or not?
Now I miss it. Thanks a lot. Boy, what a downer.
Good to see you, Paul.
Yeah. I think in the right perspective, there are people who are touring constantly because they're empty.
Yeah.
And because they need that audience positive response. Years ago for me, probably decades ago, that may have been the case. At this point, it's been incredibly gratifying. The last tour was just a chance to really take in how valuable and how much this meant to me. But I couldn't keep doing it any more than Michael Jordan could,
right?
Or I've always been more than a musician or performer. I've been an athlete.
Yeah.
And you realize that you can only do that so long. I've been blessed to do it into my 70s, which if you told me that 50 years ago, I'd say you're out of your mind. So, I miss it, but I don't crave it. I think the people who really crave it are the ones who don't find other means for gratification, either from other people or self-gratification.
Right.
Whether it's for me painting or my family or friends. I think ultimately, hopefully, I would hope that most people find that in life, at some point, you start to narrow down what's really important. And ultimately, what's important is family, friends, and how you feel about yourself. You face yourself every day when those crowds aren't there. And it doesn't matter whether there's 20,000 or 100,000 people. If you don't like who you see in the mirror, it's kind of meaningless.
Yeah. I realized a few years ago that because of what I do and what you do, my relationship to dopamine, to excitement, has been distorted, right? So I hope to do this into my 70s or even longer if I can, right? Because it's something that I really just enjoy and love to do. But I also recognize the fact that over time, as the longer time goes on, I sort of have to really make a great effort to appreciate things because of my distorted relationship with dopamine. So I can go to beautiful restaurant, or I can stay at a gorgeous resort, or I can have an experience with that anyone else on the planet would go, that's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And I recognize that it's wonderful and I enjoy it, but I also recognize that I'm not enjoying it the way I should because of my relationship to dopamine. Does that make any sense?
Totally. I don't agree for me, which is thankful, because otherwise it would make it something that I would crave and would be very, very difficult to deal with, removing myself from that. Dopamine and endorphins, that's, human produced heroin.
Yeah.
And it's addicting. I don't know. I think I've just come to some sort of terms with, I don't want to say settling, but at least realizing that you can't do that forever. And I hate to draw the analogy, but people who are in AA or any of those groups, you realize that you need to stop. You need to put that behind you. And then it's a matter of how you fill your time. I've seen people who went from drugs to becoming workout junkies.
Right. So
you need to find something, and you also need to understand that it's never going to match the high. It can't.
It's its own animal.
Totally. And
what kind of rush do you get from painting? And I mean, you're a cyclist. You paint, but your painting is probably the thing that takes up the most time for you, right?
Yeah, and it's much more solitary. It's not something that people stand up and cheer for. Right. It's not something that people are yelling for. But
is the experience, because as we've talked about, like you keep telling me, and Daisy, just fucking start painting. We've yet to do that. So I speak completely illiterately about this. When you're painting and you're getting in a groove, is there a thought of like, I can't wait to show this to somebody? Or is it really just the act of doing it?
No, it's singular. It's very much not unlike songwriting. I find that when I finish a song, it's like you completed it. You got it done. You found all the pieces to the puzzle. Right. And I find painting to be the same way. I just keep looking, and how do you balance, just like how do you rhyme? How does the melody work on the music? So satisfying in the same way, but no, there's no comparison, and nothing will ever take the place of those wonderful, amazing people around the world that for 50 years came to share, admiration and love, and it was reciprocal.
I was there, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about reciprocity. It
was religious the night I saw.
Yeah,
it really was,
and
in a good way.
Yeah, and I just got a chill because it's true, and to do shows where there's that kind of love and gratitude from an audience. Well, guess what? It's love and gratitude from me, and that reciprocity takes it to a whole different level.
Yeah.
And will anything ever replace that? No. I have the memories of it, and is there a void? Of course.
Sure.
That's
also,
life.
like I said, it's also still kind of fresh. It's not even been a year, right?
It's fresh wound.
Yeah.
It's actually been a year, December 2nd.
Oh, okay.
So I was actually in New York this year on December 1st and 2nd, and passed the Garden on both of those nights we had been playing. And there's something almost feeling like a fantasy, like an out-of-body experience. You're looking at something, and it's hard to relate to that you were there. Yeah. I look at videos of me on stage, a year and a half ago, and I go, wow. And I also have to go, that's not going to happen again.
I have video of you on stage flying right over me.
Yeah. And, speaking about the things that matter, to be able to do that, flying over the audience to a smaller stage and literally have my family out there. Wow. I mean, talk about icing on the cake.
Yeah.
So I think it's all about balance in your life that makes you able to put up with loss, whether it's parents.
Mm-hmm.
You begin to depend more on other things to support you through losses.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good analogy.
And that's where you realize how important family and friends are, because they're the people who you lean on.
Yeah.
And again, I hate drawing the analogy to a funeral, because KISS continues, and we have this amazing show planned for Vegas in 27. But me as a performer doing that's over.
Yeah.
That's over.
Do you, of course you remember, but will you tell me about, I'm sure that there were a lot of conversations or thoughts that led up to the one, but do you remember when you went, that's it. I just decided that I'm going to say it, that's it.
Yeah. I remember Gene and I talking about it years ago. You have to remember that COVID and the pandemic put a 2-year break. We started the last tour.
Right, that's right.
Before COVID.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute, we're not done. And we're getting older.
Right.
So the clock is ticking. So we just came to the decision quite naturally that this needs to, we need to decide when it ends rather than just have it peter out.
Right.
That wouldn't be KISS-like, to finish a tour and never go back out. For us, it was a matter of going around the world and sharing that one last night or nights with either the people who've known us for decades or new people.
Yeah.
And hopefully what we did was left a memory that justified that connection and adulation that people had for us, and also kind of not only validated us to them, but also kind of became, once upon a time there was a band.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what KISS is. KISS is, like it or not, KISS is mythical.
Yeah.
And that was the idea, was to leave it on a legendary note, but also to intellectually decide something is going to come to an end and actually deal with, that day was years away because we had a worldwide tour.
Right. But I'm talking about, was it a case of you're in some hotel room and you're about to go to sleep and you go, I'm going to sleep on it, but was it you woke up one morning and looked at Aaron and said, I just decided? Or was it you decided and you called Gene, or Gene called you? What was the real mechanism? Like, there was a moment when one of you or both of you collectively went, we have to be done.
I think it may well have taken place on the jet. Me, Gene, and Doc, our manager, who's been with us for
Yeah, he's like another member of the band, right?
It wasn't fatalistic, and it wasn't in any way depressing. It was just a practicality that we just said, we can't do this forever. And we can see the end. We can see, now what do we do? We can see, that this needs to have a finite time. What do we do between now and then? Doc and I have a acronym, which is QTR, quality time remaining.
Yeah.
That's, at some point, that's what it comes down to. You have so much time in life.
Yeah.
What do you want to do with it? Because you can't, one thing you do precludes you from doing another. And at some point, the idea of being in hotels when you're young and frisky and having a great time, that's the best time in your life.
Yeah.
I remember when going home between tours when I was single and much younger, going home was like
a bummer.
I sat on my sofa waiting for life to start again.
Why do we have to pause touring?
Yeah. I'm on my sofa, you know, life is out there. That slowly becomes not the case, hopefully.
Well, but you have such a rich life. Your life with your family, which is something that bonds us together, the way we feel about time with our kids, the relationship that we're both, I wouldn't say making up for lost time, but we're certainly more present than we could have been in the heyday of our, well, you never stopped having a heyday, but you know, there's a lot of time lost that you look back on, and I don't know that there's regret, because this just what our life called us to do. What your life called you to do is what you did. But you also were a family guy with great kids, and I see your life now, and that's another thing that makes me not even think about you struggling with not being on tour all the time, because I know there's a part of you that's thrilled to be home.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to negate the 800-pound gorilla, which is touring and what that's meant to me. But to kind of sit back and savor home life without the thought of a tour coming up. The idea of being home hasn't changed. I've done that for decades.
Right.
The difference is I'm staying home.
Right. You're not thinking about
4 months from now,
right.
6 months from now, we're going to be on tour. That's not going to happen. I can go out and do some shows on my own, and that will
Which you probably will, right?
Yeah, and that'll be fun. I don't kid myself. If I play to a couple hundred people or 1,000 people, that'll be wonderful. But being home at this point, I don't want to say it feels grown up. It feels right. I remember when I used to go to clubs in New York City, and I remember seeing a guy at a bar with a comb-over hairdo and looking at that guy and going, I don't ever want to be that guy where you're going, why don't you have a life?
Yeah.
Why aren't you home? So for many reasons, I think we just reached a point where I think more than anything, it's physical and emotional. Physically, you can't be ageless forever. Right. And one of the greatest things about the band is that the omnipotence of the band came from the idea that you could see us 40 years ago or 4 days ago, and it was Kiss.
Yeah.
Well, you can't do it forever. And it just became practicality and wanting to enjoy and savor the time that's left. And I have no plans on checking out anytime soon. But when I was much younger, I always saw life as kind of like a moving conveyor belt. And everybody was in front of me, and then it drops off. Well, now a whole lot of people are behind me.
Yeah.
So you kind of go, what do you do with that time? So
it's also, in fact, I think one thing that's a little more unique for you is the age of your children.
Thank God. It keeps me delusional.
Yeah.
Because my youngest is 13. My oldest Evan is 30, Colin's 18, Sarah's going to turn 16 in a week or two. But yeah, that kind of distorts my life in a good way, but also makes it important to remember your kids may be young, you may look pretty good for your age, but you are the age you are.
Right.
So enjoy the good parts of it, but don't kid yourself.
Right.
I'm blessed My dad made it to 101, and I have every intention of being around that long, but don't kid yourself. Life has an expiration date.
And it's not quantity, it's quality at this point, for sure.
Totally. The world has gotten smaller in some ways, but the idea of traveling and not doing it with 100 people and not doing it because there's a show and either doing it with Erin or doing it with the whole family, that's a terrific experience for me.
Yeah. Tell me about the moment one of you, I'm assuming it had to be you or Gene, who went, what if we put makeup on? Tell me about that moment. Because you were like playing covers, right? And you were just starting to write.
We never played covers.
You never played covers?
Never played covers. When we played our first gig in New York, we were playing Strutter and Black Diamond, and we were playing our songs. Yeah. When we were playing small dives, 80 people, 100 people, we were basically playing the first album.
Amazing.
Yeah. As far as the makeup, there's that great scene in Close Encounters where Richard Dreyfuss is making Devil's Peak or whatever it is. He seems kind of possessed, and he's putting these mashed potatoes into this shape. We wound up going downstairs from this loft that we had and going to the 5 and 10 down the street at 10 East 23rd Street, buying a mirror, picking up makeup, God knows what the makeup was we were using, and we went upstairs and just started playing with makeup.
What were you guys wearing at that point on stage?
We were wearing, actually Gene and I were wearing pants that I made.
I read this in your book.
Yeah.
I loved your memoir.
Thank you.
So much.
Well, I'm proud of it. I really wrote it. I was telling Colin a few days ago, I had the luxury of being able to write my story really for my kids when they're age, when it's appropriate for them to read it, because parents don't really get a chance. Sometimes if they have the foresight, they do videos. Oh, your children do videos of you asking questions and getting answers. So the book was really to give my kids a sense of what I went through, where I came from. And
but I threw you off. I'm sorry.
Yes.
We'll come back to the book. But so you're wearing...
Oh, yeah. So we wanted to be the band we never saw. We wanted to be the band that took what was being done a step further. I don't think we had any fantasies that we were musically adept or that we were virtuosos. We were virtuosos, But we had passion, and we had a take no prisoners attitude. And everything grew out of that. What we were doing was not popular at that time. In England and some of the related countries, there had been Bowie and Slade and, some bands with makeup of some sort.
Mark Bolan or no?
Yeah. T-Rex.
Yeah.
And that never caught on a big scale in America and was waning. We, for some reason, wound up in 8-inch platform boots and makeup. And
But was it you and Gene riffing on it?
I have to say that there was a synergy in spite of the tensions and the disparities that always existed in the original lineup, but it all fed off each other. Up until the very end of the touring, I said, we couldn't have started the band or made it happen without Peter and Ace, and we couldn't be around today with them.
Right.
So, but in the beginning, there was some sort of, simpatico, you can say, but yeah, a lot of it came from Gene and I sketching things or wanting to push the boundaries. I remember the band before Kiss that Gene and I had, Wicked Lester, which was not a band worth remembering or listening to. But I remember doing sketches of why don't all the people in the band have characters?
I was going to say, it's not just makeup, it was personas. It was...
Yeah. Well, time has proven that bands that try to pick up on the idea of costumes, it's hollow.
Yeah.
It's about what comes from inside. You can dress up, you can put a pot on your head or dress up as a rabbit. And unless you feel you're a rabbit, it's not going to work.
Right.
So what we were wearing was kind of the embodiment of who we saw ourselves as, whereas other people tried it and it just, honestly, just looked silly.
Long after the makeup and those personas, it still took a minute, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. We did 3 albums, I think, in 18 months or something.
Wow.
Yeah, something crazy. It was like, oh, you don't like this?
Yeah. How about this?
Oh, you don't like that song?
And not inexpensively, I'm sure.
We worked fairly quickly. Gene and I.
You were just relentless.
Yeah. You
believed in it.
We believed in what we were doing, and we believed that it could be as powerful on a mass scale as we were seeing on a small scale. From the very beginning, I can remember people coming in to see us, even when the first or second album was out. And, I can remember playing the Agora in Columbus, Ohio. We walk out on stage and there's a girl in the front row just hitting her boyfriend and laughing at these idiots on stage. They weren't laughing at the end of the show. I mean, we were there to make converts. We were out there we were on a crusade. So writing songs.
How many shows a year are you playing at that point?
Oh my gosh.
Over 200?
Oh yeah, we could do 14 shows in a row. I mean, that we were even able to because we were spending our hours off stage celebrating being in a rock band.
Yeah.
In the beginning, someone was always sick in the band because we were enjoying the life. How
often was that person you who was sick in the band?
I can't tell you, but I smiled through it. Kind of like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Cameron Crowe did the best movie of all time, and that's Almost Famous.
Yeah.
And Cameron lived it, so it wasn't a fantasy. And I look at that movie, and I've said to members of my family and others, that's what it was like. It was their debauchery. Yeah, but there was a purity to it. There was an
it's almost like,
innocence.
look what we're getting to do.
Yeah, and everyone who was involved loved music.
Yeah.
The women that were around, there was not, it sounds so antithetical or whatever, but it wasn't tawdry. It was about a common love of music, and everybody who was around us was celebrating rock and roll and what we did. So it was a great, great time. It was, I have no regrets, and I'm blessed that I'm in one piece and healthy.
Yeah, very.
The whole idea of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, from the very beginning, I said, you keep the drugs.
Yeah.
I just want the others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did it feel gradual when you realized?
Right around Kiss Alive, which was really the turning point. We went from selling 120,000 albums to millions and millions. And right around that time, I remember I used to always say to the road manager while I was in the dressing room, how are we doing? And what I was asking was about ticket sales, attendance. Right. And I remember we're sold out. I was like, whoa. Next night, how are we doing? We're sold out. I remember, I believe we were in Dayton, Ohio, and we had a closed curtain. And I kind of peeked out and went, holy cow, the place is packed. And that's
And what size venues are you playing at this point?
6,000, 8,000.
Wow.
Yeah. It was becoming real. And it was funny because it originally was regional. So I could go home to my furnished rented apartment and somebody would say, "Oh, how are the shows going?" I would mention somebody who opened for us and they go, "Oh, you opened for them?" I go, "No, they," so, but it all caught up over time. Obviously Detroit and that whole area was very early on,
Right.
and embraced us in a way. I used to say they opened their arms and legs to us.
That they did.
So
it was, to me, it sounds like it was a pretty classic case of something that really I don't think exists anymore in our business, which is this sense of playing little clubs, getting your fucking experience and paying your dues and learning your fucking craft and learning your showmanship in front of 50 people, so that next time you play 300 people, and then the next time it's 1,000 people, and it's little by little, and it's gradual, and there's something about by the time you peek through that curtain, yes, your brain went, holy shit, it's packed out there, but there was probably no sense of, oh my God, what are we gonna do? It was like, let me at it.
I wonder if our talking like this is based on age, looking back and saying, well, people today don't do that. But after that disclaimer, I have to say that music at that point was much more like vaudeville. You started small, you learned your craft. And yeah, by the time you ascended to that kind of success, you knew your craft. You knew how to do it. We started off in clubs. We would drive 17 hours in a station wagon, show up at a club, go into the office of the owner of the club, get made up, go out, do a show, load up, and leave again. So,
and in some cases, go to another club and play another gig.
Yeah. And so that's how it starts. And then you go from there to playing a bigger club and having bands support you. And then you go on to auditoriums. You go on to the Tower Theater in Philly. You go on to the Paramounts. You go on to these other theaters. And again, you start second or third on the bill, work your way up there. Then you wind up in arenas. And in the arena, you might be special guest. And by God, by the time you're headlining, you're a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah. There's nothing like reaching a level where you feel like you're living your fantasy to some degree. But I also feel like there's nothing like the climb. There's nothing like those years of one foot in front of the other and feeling the minute you start to feel traction, the minute you start to feel like, wow, there's more people showing up, or the venues are getting better. Like there was the sense of gradual ascent. It seemed to go like that, and I didn't appreciate it as much as I should have at the time because I was too busy working. I was too busy. But what I do remember of that time, there was a butterflies thing and an excitement. And I remember doing a gig, and I'm sure you've got many examples of this, but I remember doing on my first tour, which my first tour was in '87. And Def Leppard's Hysteria album had just come out. And I was a huge fan of Def Leppard. And I remember I had a CD Walkman, and I had just bought at Best Buy or something, they made these little speakers that you could plug into the headphone jack. And I remember putting it on the bed of my motel. We were in a motel, like a road stop off the highway on our way to the next gig. And me and my band, my first band, we sat in that room and we sat on the floor and we listened to the Def Leppard album. And there was something so like high school-y, and we're a band and we're trying to slog our way through. And I had one song out and we're playing shitty clubs, and And I remember it wanting it to be better and had my eye on a bigger prize. But when I look back at that, it is with the benefit of age and also having accomplished a lot of what I wanted to do. When I look back on that, it's so sweet. It's such a sweet memory to me. I don't want to go back there, but...
Yeah, I remember at the times where we were really struggling, so to speak, that same sense of we're a band. And I also had this thought, someday I'm going to look back on this and it's going to be the good old days. And I mean, we had so many instances where things weren't great, but that's kind of what you use as a springboard. You go, again, one of these days we'll look back, I can look back at us being stuck in San Francisco at the Vagabond Inn. And we were stuck because some of the shows got canceled and we didn't have enough money to go home, but we had enough to stay in the hotel. And we would go out and buy Velveeta cheese and hot dogs and just put all this crap into a pot and cook it. And we had cream sherry,
Yeah.
And we'd be there and it was like, this is
awesome.
This is awesome. We'll survive and this is really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, those times are the foundation of what comes after it.
So when the band really did succeed and blow up, what was your first splurge?
My first splurge of any consequence was buying my parents a car.
Your parents a car?
Yeah. They had never had a new car. We had cars that we would drive until they would stop. And then we would take off the license plates and leave it wherever it was.
Yeah, that one's done.
That's done.
Taxi?
So, I bought them I said, go find a car you like. And they found a Chrysler LeBaron.
I remember those.
Yeah, with Cordoba leather.
Rich. I'm thinking rich Corinthian.
Rich
Cordoba's wax.
Yes.
Yeah. Rich Corinthian leather.
And that was
Ricardo Montalban.
Ricardo. And he had an issue because it's Cordoba. It's not Cordoba.
Right.
And they made him say Cordoba.
Yeah.
Rich Corinthian leather. So I bought my parents that, and then a year later I said, find a house. They never had a house. We had an apartment, small one. I was always pretty practical. When we really started to make money, and some of our contemporaries were buying airplanes and 6 cars and this and that, I had a 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan, and I was thrilled. I had this awesome 1-bedroom apartment, and we had 3 nights at Madison Square Garden. And I had 1 car. It was like, people say, you only have 1 car? I said, yeah, who can drive like this? Like 2 cars,
Right.
So, I've always been fairly...
Did you splurge on clothes?
I was a clothes freak, if I bought a pair of boots because I loved shoes, I'd buy them in every color, just crazy stuff. I had an apartment that I bought, and I had a wall of closet built, and it was absolutely chock full. And after a while, it became oppressive. I realized that having too much isn't, at least for me, it wasn't fun. It just felt like it loomed.
Yeah.
I remember a buddy of mine, Kenny Ortega.
I know.
Yeah. Kenny came over, and I just said to him, I opened up the closet and said, take
what you want.
Yeah. And, then to see Kenny's name on so many great.
So you were pals with Kenny before?
Oh, my God.
Really?
I knew Kenny in 1976,
How?
77. Well, there was a circuit of clubs that you would go to in L.A. on any given night. You'd go to the Rainbow to hang out.
Right.
and then you might go to the Roxy, and then you go to the Starwood. And the Starwood was a really cool club. It was on the corner of like Crescent and Santa Monica. And we never played there. That's where I first saw Van Halen. And Kenny was part of a theater. Kenny was part of a theater troupe, I think, and they had a musical called, I think it was called Bingo's Flying Circus or something weird like that. And Kenny was a member, and he had a song he sang.
And he was dancing at that point, right?
At that point, he was
Amazing
just singing.
dancer. Oh, wow.
He may have been dancing, but there was no dancing in the show. And Kenny went on to great things from there.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Kenny came over, and it was like, just take, please. And then I, for one, reached a point where I realized that material things weren't the answer. Sometimes buying a lot of stuff just points out to you that there's a hollowness.
Yeah, you're feeling...
And that there's a void. And it ain't that. It's not fame. That doesn't fill it. It's not clothes. It's not cars. Again, it comes down to, do you like who you are?
When you were a kid, did you want to be famous?
Yes. I wanted to be famous because I would be able to make people wish they had been nicer, or that I was more popular. And I mean, in hindsight, I didn't make myself friendly. I didn't make myself accessible. I mean, we could go lay down on the couch and have a therapy session. I don't think I'm wrong. A lot of entertainers have the same issues. It's so ass backwards to be comfortable in front of a crowd and have trouble being with people on an individual basis. And I think that a lot of entertainers crave that kind of adulation. So, when I was a kid, I wanted to be famous. When I was in my teens, I wanted to be famous.
But it was mostly motivated by I'll show them?
Yes, I'll show them. Meanwhile,
which is, by the way, not a bad thing. I mean, I think it has served me in my way. It's served most people I know. It's not a bad thing.
No, I don't think it's a bad thing. But at some point, you need to accept responsibility for how people are treating you. I don't think that most people are innately bad. I don't think, I think that people respond to what you're putting out there. And at some point, and I always go back to the same thing, you have to take responsibility and say, what did I do to bring this on? Why were people, not nice? Why were people not inviting me to the party? Why, and at some point you go, because I was kind of fucked up and miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe at some point in fame, you figure out, well, that's not the answer.
Yeah, but how early into your famousness did that come to you, or did it come to you much later?
It came to me pretty early on, but it was almost like having to learn a new language. It was kind of like rewiring, because I was bringing that kind of stuff on. And it was a matter of unlearning what I saw at home. We're products of our parents,
sure.
for better or worse. There were things that I saw at home because of their issues that I just copied. And at some point, when I was 15, I walked into Mount Sinai Hospital in New York and went to the outpatient psychiatric place and said, I need help. I knew pretty early on that what I was replicating and what I was doing that I saw at home, for example, was not good, wasn't making me happy, and wasn't making other people happy. So that's kind of the start. But I mean,
Was that your introduction to therapy, really?
Yes. Yeah.
So did they pair you with somebody?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was $3 a week.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, I looked forward to that every week, because, I mean, therapy is only as good as what you're willing to commit to it.
Yeah, it's a partnership.
I mean, you can sit there and chit-chat all you want, or you can roll up your sleeves and get to work. And, it's not unlike doing, do-it-yourself root canal. Not pretty, not fun, but you feel better after.
How old were you?
15.
So did you do therapy all through the beginning of the band?
Pretty much. I took a break, and then when the band took off, I called a therapist and said, I'm going to need somebody to be a quarterback. At some point, I don't know about you, but for me, it felt like all of a sudden I realized I was on the roller coaster and we're getting pulled up. And you know that once you reach the top, you better hold on.
Yeah.
And as I was going up there, I said, I better get a co-pilot. And I reached out and got somebody to kind of like do some soul searching and hand holding.
Was that someone who remained in your life for a long time?
Yes.
You're lucky. Yeah. That's really lucky.
Yeah.
Finding a great therapist is more difficult than people think.
Yeah.
Finding the right therapist.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and it's not as easy as people think, and it also takes, again, you being willing to open up and share who you are, and then you find out if there's something. But just the idea of making time every week to go, chat. That's not therapy.
No.
And I'm a big believer in therapy, but you have to be ready to dive in. All of us get choices in life. We either live as victims and blame who we are on things that have happened in the past or our parents, and whose life is compromised then? Yours. Or you roll up your sleeves and figure it out.
That's really impressive. I didn't know that about you. And when I think about it, I'm so impressed that you at that age, especially, and then having a bit of a foundation with therapy, going into what became that hurricane, is probably a huge reason why you didn't go off the rails in other ways, right?
I think so.
You went off the rails in all the right ways.
Yeah. Me perfect? No. Did I do things? Was I fun to be around all the time? No. Could I be an idiot? Sure. But I did the best I could.
Yeah.
And it was all part of, I hate to use the word, the journey.
Yeah. What's your relationship with therapy like now?
The same.
Yeah.
I think that my friend used to say, it's the best conversation in town.
I agree.
And I think therapy at its best teaches you your misconceptions about other people and allows you to be more comfortable with who you are when you start to find out that how you see other people isn't accurate. You're seeing somebody's feature reel, and it's just you're much better off once you have a better sense of who other people are and a better sense of why you are who you are. And that brings about change.
Yeah. It's funny, though we never really deep dived on this, because now I'm thinking about conversations I've had with you where I was coming into some inevitable and well-timed realizations about my expectations of other people and my sense of judgment, which I didn't really recognize as judgment. at a time, like around the time that you and I started to have really interesting conversations, and I would always walk away from our breakfast or lunch, and sometimes topics would come up. And all full disclosure, it's not like we sit there and are just super fair about everybody. Sometimes you'll go, that guy's a fucking dick or whatever, right? But I would walk away from our conversation sometimes. You were sort of, without knowing it, you were reinforcing what I was starting to dive into in my own therapy with my therapist, where he was pointing things out to me that were long historic patterns on my part. And it just happened to be the conversations I would be having with you where you would go, yeah, but maybe he was this, or maybe she was like, you know, and it was like you were almost like a therapy chaser, like a, you know what I mean? Like, oh, there's my chaser.
That's interesting because, you know, many of the people I know go, wow, you're so easy to talk to. I'm not judgmental one-on-one. I'm the last person to go, well, if I were you, well, I'm not you.
Right.
I haven't lived a day, you know, I've never experienced what you're experiencing. So I can talk about myself, or I could, you know, talk about options. But the last thing you ever need is somebody telling you what you should do.
Right.
You need to find out what you should do, and you'll come to that realization if you work on it.
Yeah. I want you to talk a little bit about when you kind of broke off and did Phantom and you did stage work. But I want you to lead me to one of the most mind-blowing conversations we had about the chiropractor. I don't think people know that story. So do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. I had to sigh because I'm not a fan of chiropractors.
Yeah, I'm not either.
I think calling them doctors is like calling somebody a doctor of sanitation. You know,
You got to stop sugarcoating, man.
You know, well, I think that a chiropractor serves a purpose.
Yeah.
But the idea of anybody, you can call it manipulation, that's insanity. Having somebody wrench your neck is absolutely insane. And the amount of people who have strokes, who are paralyzed, who die from that is far beyond what a chiropractor will tell you. You can look it up and you can find out. I personally know people who've had strokes. And that's my introduction to, I was in Toronto doing Phantom, and I was doing 8 shows a week. I was the final Phantom in a 10-year run there. Had to do a full-on audition in New York, and they sent me up there. And one afternoon before a show, I think between there was a matinee and an evening show, my neck was feeling a little out, you know, spasm or whatever. And the makeup woman said, oh, I know a great chiropractor. And I went to her chiropractor, and he wrenched my neck, and then it didn't adjust. And he wrenched it again, and I said, you hurt me. You know, you really hurt me. And I left. And by the time I got to the theater, I couldn't think straight. I mean, it was like being stoned. And my vision was no good. I couldn't think straight. I had to bow out of the show for days, and I had to go to a hospital, and they were afraid that I could have a stroke. They did MRIs and everything, and that was my last experience with a chiropractor. And again, since then, I've known chiropractors. You want to adjust my back, you want to adjust my hips, great. Keep your fucking hands off my neck. Oh no, that person didn't know. Yeah, that's what that person would say too.
Exactly.
So no, I'm totally against anything like that, and I think you know, that's like your trainer is a doctor of physical, you know, activity. I mean, the whole idea of attaching doctor is so misleading. And I don't care who the chiropractor is. I've said it to their faces. They serve a function, but by no means is being a bone cracker make you a doctor.
Yeah. But that horrific experience aside, that was a really wonderful thing for you, right?
It was eye-opening. I had seen
a totally different kind of singing.
Oh, the technique is so different. And the last thing I would want to do is desecrate a beautiful musical with a beautiful score by turning it into Rocky Horror Show.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't let me anyway. I mean,
you trained really hard for it, right?
Hal Prince's. I went to New York and did a full audition, and then I went up to Toronto and worked my ass off every day, and worked with a vocal coach to try to get me through some little problem areas. But it was daunting. I was blessed, and perhaps you have something that's analogous. When I saw the Beatles, when I was a kid, and I saw the Beatles on TV, I was a pudgy little kid with a deformed ear and deaf on one side, and didn't play an instrument. And I saw the Beatles, and I went, I can do that. Didn't mean I could be the Beatles. I can touch that nerve with no logical reason for thinking that. And
because your parents weren't musicians, or
everybody in my family sang well.
Yeah,
but no.
Right.
And
there was no history of choosing entertainment as a career.
Painfully shy.
Right.
After we became quite successful, I was in the West End in London, and I saw Phantom there, and there was a scene. And in that scene, I went, I know what's going on there. I can do that. And for 10 years, it just ate at me. And at some point, my agent at CAA called me and said, do you have any interest in doing theater? I grew up with theater and classical music and opera. And I said, yeah. And well, you'd have to go audition. I said, well, what's it for? And he said, Phantom. I said, book a ticket. And I went to New York.
You manifested it.
Yeah, and I went to New York, and then I was determined to not only live up to what I thought I could do, but quiet the naysayers. There's always somebody who wants to see you fail.
Of course.
I couldn't let that happen. So I worked really hard and went into the show and got standing ovations. No, they weren't walking out. They were actually, they were standing ovations. And I was supposed to be the next to the last person in the 10-year run. They wound up buying out the guy who was going to take my place and keep me in the show.
Wow.
And
but you didn't do a show after that, huh?
No, I was asked from there to go to New York to do a different show, not Phantom. They were very clear in New York. They don't want to do what's called stunt casting,
right.
or they don't want to bring in a name where the show becomes identified with a star. Phantom is a show that, like Les Mis,
because the minute that person's out, the ticket sales are going to plummet.
Yeah, and the show is the star.
Right.
Yes, I was asked to go to New York and do another show, and it was so all-consuming for me to commit myself to be at my best. I literally did the shows and went back to a hotel room, then did the show and went back. And the idea of going to New York to do a show that I didn't think was of that caliber was going to take just as much work for me. So I passed. I would have loved to have gone to New York and continued what I was doing, but the idea of committing myself to something like that, there's only, if I'm in, I'm all in.
Right.
And if I commit to something, I do it to the best of my ability.
Having never done theater, I'm curious about, how many shows a week were you doing?
8.
Okay. So let's pretend you could do 8 Kiss shows a week because it's so strenuous. But at that time, what's the main difference? Because what I picture with theater, committing to a role like that and a show like that, is that you have no life other than that show. But then again, I think to myself, when I'm on the road, I feel like I kind of have a life, but I think it's because I feel like it's so in control of my show, no matter how, and I like to do 4 or 5 nights a week on the road. So a lot of time that includes travel too. So it's tiring, but I always feel like I know what my schedule is. I know I have my mornings and I have my after show hang time and all that. Can you tell me, like, it's such a different thing than when you're touring with the band, right?
Well, for me, it was very different than other people in the show who were all bona fide Broadway performers, seasoned performers. For me, this was, in the best way, a Herculean effort. And for me to be able to do it, I had to dedicate myself totally. Everyone else had lives and did things.
I see.
But for me, it was such a stretch and took so much concentration and focus to make it happen that it meant committing myself completely. It's such an interesting thing that when I was doing it and I was doing quite well, people would say, "Oh, this is a natural role for you." And I was like, "Why? Because I'm doing it well?" You know, it was an all-consuming, totally committed time for me, and I loved it, and I loved the discipline. In rock and roll, oh, my toe hurts, or I got a splinter in my finger. In theater, tough shit.
Yeah.
You either do it or you don't. There's no room for that kind of crap, and that's kind of what I've always adhered to. I've always subscribed to that. No excuses, no, I can't do this, I can't do that because of this. I have a note from my mom that, the dog ate my homework. For me, it was a lot of work, but it also validated the way I like to work. That, you go in and you do your job. You shut up and do what's expected of you.
And you're part of a repertoire that's a different thing than just being part of a band.
Totally.
Where you're really the band leader too.
Totally. And interestingly, with that show, I was told, the Phantom is the loneliest role in the show because he's on stage when everybody else is off for the most part. So you don't get to socialize. Well, my dressing room became social central. I mean, we just had a great time, and I was embraced by everybody. Perhaps initially they questioned whether I could do it, and I totally get it. That bozo with the white makeup's going to come in and do Phantom of the Opera. But we had an awesome time, and people were so kind to me and so supportive.
Would you want to do something like that again?
I don't
now
think
that
I
you
can.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think I
What if it were an important and fun role that wasn't as demanding?
Anything's possible. I know that I couldn't commit that kind of time or focus. There was a time in my life where my first marriage was falling apart, and maybe I needed to get away, and it served many purposes for me. But at this point, I don't know that I have it in me to commit like that. And again, not to draw analogies to Kiss, but I did it,
Right.
and
you did it really well, and you had a great experience.
And that's something that it's a mountain I climbed, and it was an incredible time. I learned a lot about myself. Got involved with a charity for children with facial differences.
Yeah.
Which was really interesting because nobody up until that point knew about my ear, or it was always covered. And when I did that show, somebody wrote me a letter. I used to get quite a few letters. And she was heading an organization called About Face that dealt with children with facial differences. And she said, you brought something to the role which I hadn't seen before. And I sent her a note saying, well, I happen to have a deformity called omicrotia. And we talked. And I wound up going and speaking to children with their own differences. And God knows some of them had much more challenges than me. Mm-hmm. But it gave me a chance to say, life's not always fair. The playing field's not always even, but you can do it, and it's not going to be easy, and your parents may not understand. And, you know, sometimes parents will say, you're just like everybody else. Well, you're not. So that's a good starting point. And then I would speak to parents. It was just one of those examples for me. I was saying to somebody a few days ago, and I think I said it in my first book, the less secrets you have, the more free you are.
Yeah.
You know, the secrets are really tough to keep.
But in your case, you could keep both secrets. I assume you kept both secrets because it wasn't just that you had a physical difference, it was that you were deaf in one ear. And for you to go and speak to kids especially who are struggling, feeling different, and probably feeling so fearful, like, how is this going to prevent me from doing wonderful things? To be a guy who led one of the greatest, biggest bands in music history, deaf in one ear, is a fucking accomplishment.
You know, I had 5 surgeries on my ear. They took out rib cartilage and carved an ear, and then over a series of 4 other surgeries refined it. That didn't happen until I was in my 30s because the technique didn't exist. So, you know, to be able to share that with kids who are struggling with sometimes issues that are far beyond that. You know, kids go through so much ridicule and staring, I know firsthand, and you know, to have somebody who can relate to it and has succeeded on some level, it was a blessing for me. It was one of those times that I didn't realize that. Again, we could wind up on the couch, but in many ways, the phantom was me. It was a disfigured person who was yearning for the love of a woman, and yet when he was given it, he couldn't accept it, and he's killing people, you know, in the meantime. So the show was very, very eye-opening and therapeutic for me, and then it gave me a chance to share who I am and what I hid about myself. It's awesome. Life's been great.
Yeah. Doing something like that outside of your comfort zone, or not necessarily your comfort zone, but your milieu, your leads me to, I think it was right when I met you a few years ago. You had just done Soul Station. Mm-hmm. And I've told you this to your face,
it's a great story.
When you sent it to me, I was like, oh, fuck, I just got to know, I really like this guy. And it's a soul record, and I'm a fucking R&B freak, and I'm like, Paul Stanley singing R&B, I don't want to hear it, because if it sucks, I'm going to be the guy going, hey, I love what you wore on the cover, right?
Yeah. Like the jacket.
Yeah, nice jacket. And I put it on in the car, and I couldn't believe how great it was. Yeah. And not just great and authentic, but I never heard you sing like that. I didn't know that you could sing like that. And then I remember saying to Daisy, I couldn't wait to play it for her. And I feel like I've told the story so many times that I've given myself the credit for this, but I think Daisy was the one who said, this is what he should always be singing. This is like, he needs to do this all the time. And then we got to see you at your birthday party, and you got up and you did a couple songs live with, tell me about like what that was like for you. And like, I know that there's more Soul Station to come, but I just like on camera, if you've got to hear this project that he does called Soul Station, it's so fucking great.
Thank you. I mean, I grew up with R&B. I grew up with Philly soul, with Gamble and Huff, and Motown with Holland Dozier Holland, and Tom Bell at Philly soul at Philadelphia International. All that music was. I saw Otis Redding when I was in my teens, so that music was as important to me as the British rock, blues rock that I found my way into. And as I'm saying, I'm going, well, I was a big fan of Steve Marriott from Humble Pie. Steve Marriott was immersed in that. You know, Rod, you know.
Yeah. So he said, I just wish my whole life I was Sam Cooke.
Yeah. Between Sam Cooke and David Ruffin. I remember seeing Rod at the Garden in 77, I think, and just going, holy shit, you know, this guy is the bee's knees. This guy is amazing. So whether it was Smokey and the Miracles or the Four Tops or the Delphonics out of Philly, there was so much brilliant music, and it was also orchestrated beautifully. It wasn't just great melodies and songwriting, which was brilliant, but the arranger, the string arranger, Paul Reiser, was a kid. All that music just meant so much to me that, you know, I don't know, 10 years ago, I just thought, wow, I'd love to sing. Well, I'd love to hear those songs. And the idea of being able to be surrounded by that. And the band just fell together. And it's like a family. We just love playing. And the idea is to do those songs, not karaoke, but capture the essence. And yeah, we're pretty close to the originals. But I think what makes the recordings and the band live so powerful is that, not unlike Kiss, it's not about mimicking or the exterior of it. It's the heart of it.
Yeah.
Those songs, you know, you're talking about hearing it the first time or dreading it. I remember being with Rod up at Starbucks, and we're talking for a minute. I'm talking about, Soul Station, you know, my band and this and that. And he goes, who sings?
Not you. Certainly not you, mate.
Who sings? I go, I do. And he goes, and totally honest and without any attitude, he said, you can handle those songs, you know? I said, here. And I put it on. And it was very funny.
Yeah.
You know, he listened to the whole thing and then he goes, I got to go to Vegas and sing Do You Think I'm Sexy? You know?
Well, but I mean, talk about getting a little, almost like a little knighthood from...
And Paul Rodgers loves the album. You know, people who I very much respect.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a passion. It's nothing that I did on a whim.
What's next for Soul Station, though?
Shows. We'll book some shows. My guess is we might go back to Japan. We did 12 shows in 6 days there. 2 shows a day.
Damn.
Yeah. And it's glorious. I do it. They know. I don't want to be paid. I don't want to have an expensive hobby either.
Right.
But as long as they're taken care of, I'm happy.
Yeah.
You know, it's glorious music.
But that's the thing I noticed when I saw you guys play live at your party, was that it was love coming out of it from all of you.
Totally.
It was just sort of like, and I get it, like any time that, you know, if I just bust out a cover at a gig, or even if it's just me on an acoustic guitar or whatever, or sometimes I sit at the piano before I do a ballad, and I'll just start playing What You Won't Do for Love by Bobby Caldwell, because it's one of my favorite songs of all time. and the audience loves it because everybody knows it. But when people, after the show, I've just played for 2 hours and a lot of hits and my songs that I wrote all of them, and people go, "Oh my God, I love when you did that Bobby Caldwell." And I'm like, "Did you see the rest of the fucking show?"
Yeah.
But I realize it's that there's so much love coming through.
Totally.
Paying
and
respect
it's
to
connecting
those songs.
to, there's an emotional tie to something in their lives.
Yeah.
And a photograph, a snapshot of something in their lives. When we've done Just My Imagination,
Mm-hmm.
when the guitar starts, you hear the audience go, oh, interestingly, people don't necessarily remember songs until they hear them.
Yeah.
And then they go, "Oh, I know that one."
Yeah.
Delphonics, La La Means I Love You.
Yeah.
It's just a killer
song.
So for me, it's such a joy. It's a selfish joy. I do it because I love it. Otis Williams heard our version of Just My Imagination, and he goes, it's as good as ours.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, I can hang up now.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a matter of committing yourself, digging into yourself. I think that's what, and by no means am I putting myself in that class, but all the great song interpreters understand lyrics the way an actor understands a script.
Yeah.
And whether it's Rod or anybody who covers material, they know the lyric. And what I say to people who come to me and ask me about their singing, I say, the first thing you got to do is look at the lyric. It's not a matter of memorizing the lyric. It's a matter of reading it and understanding what that is. Because talking about some of these talent shows that are on TV,
Yeah.
some of these people are doing all kinds of vocal acrobatics. Mm-hmm. And I've said to Aaron, I've gone, they might as well be singing in Mandarin.
Yeah.
It means nothing. They have no clue. Yeah, they're hitting it out of the park, as far as acrobatics. But where's the lyric?
Luther Vandross used to say, "Sing to me, not at me."
Yeah, exactly. I sent you a singer that I saw on Instagram who you should love.
When did you send it?
Yesterday or the day before.
I'm not caught up yet.
Yeah. You'll talk about Luther. This is right up that alley.
Not Justin.
No. No. That's an acquired taste.
Yes. He keeps sending me, and I'm not going to say the guy's name because I don't want to embarrass him, although he certainly is beyond embarrassment, apparently. Paul started sending me this guy on Instagram who sings covers, and he's usually outside and hiking or outside by the beach, and he's absolutely fucking horrendously horrible. And I keep wondering if he knows that he's horrible and he's just taking the piss. But he's so committed. I think he thinks he's really great. And he's awful. And the first couple things he sent me, I laughed and I was like, wow. And then he kept sending me. And I was finally like, dude, you need to stop sending me this guy because it's starting to get annoying. And then he sent me 10 more.
Yeah, it's like a box set.
Same thing.
And then sometimes we'll be having a conversation on text about something great, like or sharing some musical thing that we really love. And then 30 seconds will go by and it'll go ping, and it's Paul sending me another one of his fucking videos.
Yeah.
On that note,
yes.
I don't know, many names will come to mind, but just tell me the first one that comes to mind. If you could have traded voices with anybody in the world, who would it have been?
Oh my gosh.
Other than the kid we're talking about.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that would be that would be something. Sam Cooke.
Yeah, that's probably my first one
and
too.
And when you mentioned some of the other singers, they're all, they're students of Sam Cooke. If you talk about Steve Perry.
Yeah, for sure.
If you talk
even Rod,
Rod's got that. So,
although Rod has said that his style was influenced mostly by Sam Cooke, Otis, and Al Jolson.
Well,
And I went, what? He said, oh, yeah, mate, I grew up on Al Jolson, too.
the beauty of being an artist is taking your inspirations and turning them into something that is less identifiable.
Yeah.
So yeah, Robert Plant at his greatest. I saw Zeppelin in '69, so I was like 17, and that was a religious experience. That set a bar for me that I could never reach, but it said this kind of excellence exists, this kind of perfection, the band, the synergy,
Yeah.
the chemistry, the sexuality, the presentation was so mind-boggling. The way they just played together and just went off on, and Robert's singing was like, how can anybody do that?
Yeah.
So I would have to mention him. Steve Marriott in his prime was also another. When we were talking about song interpreters and stylists, Tony Bennett.
Yes.
Tony Bennett is just
To the end.
to the end.
I saw him a year or so before he died, and it was still phenomenal.
And that's the perfect example of somebody who savors every word in a song.
Yes.
And understands what he's singing about. So that's like palpable.
Well, I had this incredible opportunity a couple times over the years to produce Barbra Streisand. And she said something to me in a session once that I never forgot, which I was like, of course. It was the first time I was working with her. And we're working on a section. It was a pop song that I had written and she was recording. And she was a workhorse. But there was this one section that I was like working her hard. And I said, I feel like we're getting away from it. And she goes, yeah, you know why? Because I'm singing it. I have to act it. I can't. And I thought, this is maybe the premier female vocalist of all time saying, well, I'm not really a singer. I'm an actress who sings.
Well, interestingly, because there's an album of Tony's called The Art of Excellence.
Oh, of course I know it.
And it's all new songs, relatively new. There are no standards. And his grasping of lyrics is acting. There's a savoring and a depth that when he's singing, he might as well be in a movie scene.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I think is lacking from a lot of current day singers, is that they're not focusing on lyrics.
I agree.
They're focusing on technique or acrobatics, but the poetic, aspect of a lyric is lost.
Well, speaking of singers, I do this thing I wrap up these episodes with a gift. I decided when I started to do these shows, I wanted to give every guest a gift, and I thought, vinyl. Whether you have a record player anymore or whatever.
I do.
Vinyl is still vinyl, So I thought, what am I going to give Paul? I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought, I hope I nailed it. This is going to be obscure to a lot of our viewers.
Wow. John Farnham, unfortunately in America,
Yeah.
has never, ever gotten an iota, a fraction of the accolades that he deserves. He's just a mind-boggling singer. You've done shows with him. And in Australia, he's
God.
He's God. And he's gone through some very horrific times.
Yeah.
And boy, that guy can sing.
But I thought, I know, because we've been talking about him the last, year or so.
Mm-hmm.
When you realized that I had worked with him, or I forget how it was that we connected on John Farnham, and when I knew that you really got it, like you appreciate him the way I do, I did this, I think I might have told you this, but in the 90s, I played a couple nights at the Greek Theater, and John came into town for something. And so we were hanging out. We'd already been friendly. We'd written some songs together. And I've always said, for as long as I can remember, to me, Sam Cooke is the greatest singer who ever lived, and John Farnham's the greatest singer alive. Not anymore, obviously, right now because of some health stuff that he's had. But this is when he was still just like vocally just. So he's in L.A. He's going to come to the show at the Greek, and I said, "Will you get up and do something in my show?" And he went, "Nobody knows me here." And I said, "That's all. That's why I want you to." So he does this. He wrote this cover. He arranged this cover of Help, the Beatles' Help, as a ballad. And it's a staple in his show in Australia for years. And it's so incredible. And the range is mind-blowing. So I taught it to my band, and I played piano. And I brought him out in the middle of my show to an audience packed at the Greek who didn't know who he was. And he got a standing ovation.
I've always, and I've told Evan, who my son, who's a musician and sings,
who's really talented,
who's very, very talented, and I always say, look at their mouths, look at their tongue placement on certain words, look at where they're placing their voice on different words, and he's one of those examples that you can learn by watching. It's not just a matter of what he's doing, but trying to understand how he does it.
Well, he's a great rock singer with tons of rasp and power, but he's really also an opera singer. He could sing opera easily. And it's so weird you said that, because one of the things that I've noticed about him, and you singers out there should pay attention to this, if you watch pop and rock singers traditionally, when they're going for a really high note, they go like this with the microphone, or they get under the microphone, they put their head up like this. And it's the exact opposite thing you should do.
Totally.
And when I started to watch John live, he would take the mic, and when the highest notes, his head would go, he would.
Totally. It's like,
like,
yeah, it's this
because
is the
it just
last
opens
thing.
it, because this
Yes.
is just constricting.
Totally.
And his mouth is open really wide, and the power, everybody I play him for, who's never heard of him, and a lot of people are Americans who've never heard of him, are all completely flabbergasted. So
Yeah, the greats, it's not about, that's not how you hit high notes. You hit high notes here, and it's voice placement, where you have sinuses, you have hollows here, and that's, you sing down to a note, you don't sing up to a note.
And this is a new pressing they did of this album. This was the album that got me into him.
This was the,
and it was the it has You're the Voice on it.
Yeah, You're the Voice. That's crazy.
So thank you for being here. Thanks for being my guest. I hope you enjoy that. We should maybe open a bottle of your wine.
Yes, or
and by your wine, I don't mean one of the bottles that he has at home that's in his stash, but he has his own wine.
Just for my friends.
No, I meant to do a little. I'll do a little product placement.
What I do, I have a friend who has a vineyard in Uruguay, and does a beautiful Pinot Noir. So he gave me an acre of his land, which was lovely, and we did about 1,000.
As one does.
Yeah, and we did 1,000 bottles.
If I had a nickel for every time somebody gave me an acre of land, I would have nothing.
We did 1,000 bottles. There's another year coming, but I did sets of 3, and we had so much of it that I started selling it at Rock and Brews at our various restaurants that Gene and I own. And all the money goes to a charity that does reconstructive surgery on children's ears.
I love it.
So
I think I told you I did an episode of this show with my friend Eric Benet, who's an incredible singer. And so I said, "What do you want to drink?" And he said, "I'm a wine guy." So we did a bottle of your wine, and it was delish.
Yeah, it's very, very nice. It's an easy wine to drink. And on that note, we can talk all day.
Yeah.
And at some point, it just comes down to people realizing that there's nothing more important than family and friends. I'm blessed with Erin, my wife, for we'll celebrate 20 years married, but we've been together 23. Evan, Colin, Sarah, and Emmy, that's the center of my universe, and your family and friends should be the center of yours.
And I'm terribly grateful that you and I have become friends.
Likewise.
Took a long time.
Yes,
Took us a
but-
long time for us to really catch up, but
Well worth
I think
the
the world of you.
well worth the
You're
wait.
one of my
Thank you so
favorite
much.
people.
Ditto.
Thanks,
Ditto.
buddy.
Ditto. Pleasure.